Welcome to the InfoMullet YouTube channel. If you enjoy this content, please like or share. And if you'd like to support the InfoMullet by becoming a mulleteer, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate your support. India and China border dispute. This one's interesting. I think it's interesting too because a lot of people are like, oh, these are big countries. And the first thing that, if you're not familiar with this, the first thing you hear is that there's two nuclear armed countries that have fought wars in the past, just had a fight where 20 people on one side, maybe up to 50 on another died. And so people are like, does this mean it's World War III? What's the InfoMullet answer when anyone asks, is this World War III? No, it's not World War III. So we can calm down on that. It's not going to be World War III. The second thing that they heard about this is that these deaths were not like artillery and planes. These were deaths that were involved in fisticuffs and rock throwing. And people are like, wait, what? How is this going on? The Indian and the Chinese army go at each other. Well, so here's the background. Here's the context. India and China have been at war, or not, they haven't been at war. They've gone to war in the past over a border that runs the Himalayas. It's like 1961 or 2. And China won, right? So they had a border line that was set up, but it was somewhat in contention. It's called the targeted line of control and the actual line of control. So there's two border lines. The targeted is where it's supposed to be by treaty. The actual is where India has been. I mean, this is the middle of the Himalayas. It's like 14,000 feet up in the air. This is a really remote, rugged, isolated environment. And India has moved over the years to sort of claim some extra miles. And this has been going on for decades. So this is nothing new. But what happened recently is India is building a road, one of these high altitude freeways to link north-south road, which makes it easier to move troops and respond to China's logistics in this disputed area. And so in 2013 and 2014, again in 2017, you had these clashes in the disputed territory. Again, this is at high altitude. This is almost close to 3 miles high that these disputes are being. So you're already at a very rugged remote. And by agreement, to avoid an outbreak of another war, both countries, and this is I don't know of many borders that do this, agree, we're going to send really aggressive nationalistic troops into this area, but we're going to leave all their weapons back. So by agreement, they don't carry firearms. I mean, they have artillery and they have tanks, but it's back in the rear. It's way far. So these patrols, they're not armed with firearms. They're armed with sticks. They're armed with metal rods. They may put like shards of metal in a wooden stick. They have fists. And these fist fights, there was one just a couple of weeks ago when I first began talking about this, that was a fist fight and stone throwing, injured like 20 Indians. The Chinese captured a bunch. And so you have these conflicts that are not involving modern firearms, but are still very intense. You have two nationalistic governments. Both of them have a belief that in the army especially, have racial superiority. Our military is better, and so when they get in close proximity, it's a brawl usually. And what happened a couple days ago is there was this fight several weeks ago where about 24 people were injured. There had been talks on the 13th of June to sort of de-escalate and move. And what you had was an Indian patrol was going along a very high mountain pass or trail. I shouldn't call it a pass. It's really a trail. This is by foot. And they run into People's Liberation Army, a Chinese patrol coming the other way. Now, the Indians said that they were ambushed. The Chinese said that they were responding to illegal Indian activity. Take your pick. Whatever happened, this is the middle of the night. You're 14,000 feet up. You're on a mountain trail. You got a gorge on one side, and a brawl breaks out. Middle of the night. All of a sudden, troops from both sides begin rushing into this area from traveling over 2 miles to get there. And you pretty soon have a brawl of about 600 people. Middle of the night, mountain trail, big gorge right next to you. So what happens is a lot of people during the fight either get pushed, shoved, or simply stumble and fall off this crevasse and fall to their deaths. We know that the Indians have lost 20 troops so far, have died in this way. There's claims that the Chinese may have lost up to 50 troops this way. This is a situation that, unlike past clashes, one of the reasons they don't have firearms is they're trying to avoid both these countries are so nationalistic. The fear is if they have fatalities, national pride will become on the line, and you'll get in this feedback loop. I mean, you go back to the battle in Syria between Russia and the U.S., where both sides kind of agreed not to talk about it because they didn't want their respective home populations, where the U.S. ended up killing about 300 Russians. They didn't talk about it because they didn't want their country's nationalist populations to sort of make de-escalation hard. Same thing's going on here. India originally said, well, there was only 1 or 2 killed. Now they've had to admit there were 20 killed. China's released no numbers of deaths, which is unusual because it's not like if they wanted to rah, rah, rah and get people stoked up, they'd release the deaths. But there's a real problem here for India in that China is so much bigger, even before the pandemic. China's economy is about 14 trillion. India's economy is about 3 trillion. China spends about 220 billion on its military, or what we like to call a quarter US, whereas India spends about 52 billion, an eighth US. So there's a huge disparity in size, and India cannot afford a fight with China at this point. India is suffering in the pandemic a lot worse than China is. China, for as much as we've sort of the civil liberties violations they did with this people's war method of containing the outbreak, they've done a much better job than India, and India is suffering a rapid outbreak. Now, India on its borders has 3 semi-hostile neighbors. You got Pakistan on one side with the Kashmir province, the disputed Kashmir province and all that. You got China now on the north. Nepal's not happy with India too. So really you have this situation where India's its borders are now being increasingly hostile and militarized while the pandemic's going on. What results of this is India is now, you'll see India, Prime Minister Modi has like the party in India, I think it's the BNP, don't quote me on that, is a very nationalistic, populist sort of government, much like Trump's administration, and Prime Minister Modi has approached Trump for help against China, Nepal, and Pakistan. So this fisticuffs that began in the middle of the night that result in these deaths may result in more strategic alignment between India and the US, because India is looking for allies to check its perceived fear against Pakistan, Nepal, and China. And yes, Mick has this. If you want to see the level of national pride, watch the border display between India and Pakistan. This is I just shared this actually with a muleteer, Stefan, right before the AMA. If you want to see a nonviolent version of nationalism, Google India-Pakistan border closing ceremony and watch the YouTube videos. This thing has a sense of style that would put Hollywood nightclubs to shame. What it is it's the border between Pakistan and India, and they have a ritualized, very aggressive, very ceremonial, like they find the tallest troops they have, they put headdresses on them that go 3 feet in the air, they have all these elaborate moves and shouts and very aggressive posturing, and it's all staged and choreographed. They do it every night. It's kind of a tourist event, but it does show the level of nationalism between the two countries in the dispute here. Questions, so India questions here. Road gave India year-round access to the area. Thanks, Mick. Beth pointing out that, yeah, if you're in the US, the highest you're going to get is like 11,000 feet. Mount Rainier had like 13,000, I think. Himalayas are 14,000 and up. So they're very high up. So John's asking about, look at the borders in the region of India, Pakistan, Nepal, and China. Do you also overlay historical borders in recent centuries? So this is a good question. What John's talking about is, if you think about the British Empire, when the British Empire colonized this area, everything from Afghanistan through Bangladesh was, and maybe further, don't quote me on this, but at least Afghanistan through Bangladesh was one border, British colony. Now they would separate this and they'd have different civil authorities. But then as the British began withdrawing in the 1940s, you had this partition, and the partition was mainly between a Muslim population in what is, so Afghanistan splits off, you have this partition of what is mainly Muslim Pakistan now from what is mainly Hindu India. That partition, 1947, I think, caused a tremendous amount of violence. Hundreds of thousands of people killed. There was conflicts and wars. That set the tone for the conflicts that have occurred ever since. This isn't to say that there isn't a large Muslim population in India. There is. There's a Muslim population in India about the size of 3/4 of the United States. I think it's 230,000 Muslims in India. So yeah, in a nation of 1.2 billion, that's a minority, but that's a huge population. And these ethnic conflicts between Muslim and Hindu populations have existed. But in the 1970s, Bangladesh splits off from India. It's a Muslim majority country. It was for a while more aligned with Pakistan. And if Sabina's on here, she'll correct me because she knows this better than I do, but I'm kind of going off memory here. So you have these historical divisions. I don't tend to put too much credence that something that happened is the sole reason. For like the China-India dispute, that emerged in 1967 as you have a rising China and a rising India meet in the Himalayas over this very strategic path. And Bangladesh, for as much as it aligned with Pakistan in the 1970s, recently the government in Bangladesh, which is also suffering from a very horrible pandemic outbreak, it's aligning itself with India for economic reasons. There's a lot of economic trade that goes on. A lot of day laborers from Bangladesh go into India. So you got to be careful. Some of these historical narratives are useful for context, but are not explanatory for all that's going on in a region. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to follow the InfoMullet, visit us on Facebook or Twitter. And if you'd like notifications when we post new video content, click on the red subscribe button below the video. If you've ever wanted to become a mulleteer and support the InfoMullet, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate the support.